Welcome to the Poultry Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Molnix, and on today's episode, I have Eric Rupnow. Eric is going to be speaking with us from J&D Fans today, and he is passionate about ventilation. Eric has been a big fan of the show, and we've had lots of good conversations, whether at the different IPPE or peak or those things. And man, when I could see his passion for ventilation and the fact that we've also gotten a chance to work together on a couple projects, I had to share Eric with you guys. So welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's always good to talk like agriculture. And if we can dive into the ventilation piece, let's have some fun.
Absolutely. Eric, will you share a little bit about who you are with the listeners?
Okay. My name, again, Eric Rupnow. I grew up north of Wausau, Wisconsin, kind of right smack in the center of the state. My dad was a dairy veterinarian, and we grew up with sheep and horses and involved in the 4-H programs real heavy, livestock judging, showing livestock, all that stuff, and kind of had that dream as a kid, that you're going to end up out west, on some big cattle ranch or feedlot or something like that. So I ended up taking my college time at North Dakota State University and got that degree in animal and range science. And when I was getting ready for graduation, I realized, guess what? I don't want to make $15,000 a year and live in a bunkhouse. So, because I'm really not a cowboy.
No future on Yellowstone for you.
No Yellowstone for me. So I ended up entering the swine industry. And it's 1995. That industry was growing and seeking and finding people to be a part of that integration. They also had it set up that it created some work-life balance for people. A lot of times agriculture doesn't always create work-life balance, right? So they had it set up that way. Moved myself to Pipestone, Minnesota, and started that. So I worked in the swine industry for most of my career, whether it be in the sow end, boar stud stuff, wean to finish, kind of worked my way through all of that and ended up going, I got to find something a little bit different, and ended up on the swine nutrition side. And that ended up being just a lot of consulting, if that makes sense, where you're just helping people solve problems. And if you're there on their lucky day, maybe you pick up some business. Married 27 years. My wife, Larissa, we met in Louisville, Kentucky at livestock judging, National Livestock Judging Contest. We raised 2 boys, again, the same way that we were raised, around showing livestock and those things. We still have a small flock of ewes and sell some sheep to kids for their show projects and stuff like that, try to help them out. And one son ended up becoming a design engineer, and the other one, he's finishing up his senior year in sports management and played college football. So that was quite the experience for all of us. A lot of fun.
Where do you play football
at? Carroll University in Waukesha, Wisconsin. It's a Division III school, play in the CCIW conference. So if anybody who follows Division III football knows that North Central won the Division III national championship, and that's one of their schools from their conference that we had a hard time with, just like everybody else. So, but no, that's a great experience. Again, a different experience than I could ever provide a kid growing up because of agriculture. He found that, again, had passion for it. He's currently trying to get himself a graduate assistant program and get his MBA and kind of move through that. But he still credits being a part of agriculture and livestock as a big thing. Today we live in Nemaha, Iowa. And as I was telling you earlier, Nemaha, Iowa is famous for the Farm All Promenade. And it was a group of farmers locally that basically half of them dressed like women, half dressed like men. The men were on, I believe they were on H's or M's, and the women were on C's, and they square danced these things. And it was actually an amazing thing to see. The cool thing, we talk about work ethic a lot in the ag industry or in any industry. Both my sons had the opportunity to work for one of those guys, and, baling hay on a rack and out in the sun and, helping tear down this old building or whatever, the daily picking rocks, all that stuff. So they got a chance to have that work and create that work ethic. And that's kind of the beauty. I think that's what fuels the passion for agriculture and myself and my wife, because you're part of it, but we don't own it like the typical person thinks of a farmer, right? She spent 25 years teaching agriculture education. She's an FFA advisor, and now she works for Collis and Embryo, where they do basically reproductive technologies in cattle and small ruminants. So that's kind of how we land where we're at. I wish somebody had told me when I was 21 years old what the poultry industry was, because it's a pretty amazing thing. That's a story that really needs to be told to people, where that chicken and egg comes from, because there's a lot of opportunity out there for people. I mean, it's pretty impressive. That's one thing I like going to IPPE, just because I see how big that industry is and how much it comes together. I don't think any industry comes together from the processing and production together like they do in the poultry industry. It's impressive.
It is definitely a different scale than the pork industry. I've been to the World Pork Congress there in Iowa, and it's hands down, quite a bit smaller, quite a bit more confined compared to IPP, where you've got, one of the biggest convention halls in the U.S. full of poultry equipment providers and technicians, plus another room off to the side even that's got all the feed additives, and a room I've never even been in. It's crazy down there.
I made a point last year to go walk through there, and then I'm talking to a lot of people that I'd worked with in the past from the swine side of things. And you do see a lot of crossover. J&D manufacturing, it was started as some guys bending pipes on race cars and decided, hey, we're going to make freestalls for dairy barns. And then Don Ratsky, who's the owner of the company, was kind of a engineering geek junkie, whatever you want to call term you want to use there. He started diving into this ventilation sphere, and that has been a focus for probably half of the country's 43 years of existence. And that's kind of what drew me to it. I went to the Iowa Pork Congress and was visiting with Kirk Brinks, who was the VP of Sales and Marketing, and we're standing next to this fan that was released there and that year at IPPE in 2020. Yeah, it would have been January 2020. And I'm standing there looking at this fan, and he's like, what do you think? I said, this is the greatest thing ever. So I'm looking at a 58-inch fan. It has no belts and pulleys and nothing to break, or, just if everything's working, it should be a maintenance-free thing, right? It should be something that put in a wall, it's going to work. The design of it, everything about it. It was a breakdown fan. So you talk about just buying fans. We tell people we're selling you CFM, right? We can sell you a 70-inch fan and I get 17 of them on a truck, or I can sell you this 58-inch fan that does the same CFM and I get 75 of them on a truck. Yeah, you got to put them together, but we're shipping 300 of them to California. Guess what? It's going to pay for itself. So kind of that innovative thing is what brought me to J&D. I always kind of, through all of that swine, saw so many failures, mistakes in design of barns, and then in execution of how poor ventilation caused more problems in terms of health and disease and just growth and just efficiencies. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, there's a lot of other things that go into it, but ventilation failures or mishaps or whatever you want to call that can really ruin a group of hogs. And I think it's the same in anything else as we dive into the dairy too. A lot of people think, oh, dairy calf, keep it warm. Yeah, but warm and wet's not good for lungs. It doesn't matter. So it's in anything. We're providing a great environment, a 70-degree day, in a nice little tree grove. It's perfect for everybody and every species of livestock too. How do we create that in mass population facilities? And that's the challenge, and that's the opportunity, and that's what kind of keeps me going through this thing. So
we will be back after a quick break.
Are you an egg farmer looking to optimize your operations? To streamline your egg flow and maximize efficiency? Then mark your calendars. Prism Controls, the inventor of egg flow, is bringing the future of egg flow to peak, April 9th through 10th, in Minneapolis at the Minneapolis Convention Center. We're unveiling the next generation of egg flow, a revolutionary system designed to utilize today's technology to elevate your production to unprecedented levels. Imagine seamless, precise egg movement, reducing breakage and boosting your bottom line. Our cutting-edge technology is engineered to adapt to your specific needs, providing unparalleled control and reliability. See how Prism Controls can transform your farm. Stop by our booth at Peak in Minneapolis, April 9th through 10th. We'll show you how to crack the code to greater efficiency. Prism Controls. The future of egg flow is here.
Well, J&D, what is a big problem that they've solved in the industry?
In the poultry industry, I think the big problem that was solved was putting together a light trap combination system for a cage-free house that kept everything flush to the inside. There wasn't anything sticking out. And then it was tested. It was tested pulling that air through that light trap and making sure that the static pressure in between the light trap and the fan is where it's supposed to be. And then making sure the size matches. We're not overworking the motors or overamping the motors and things like that. So that made a big thing. One thing that I see that J&D is doing the past 2 years and then moving forward is, okay, there's so many pieces to putting together a ventilation system, right? You've got, inlets and actuators and all of these different things, stir fans and all of that. You can go and try to create your own, say, sidewall inlet or tunnel inlet, right? And that's a tough thing to create. So what we've done is gone to more partnering with other companies to say, okay, the TPI inlets, I look at those as the best in the world. I haven't seen or found anything that was better. They're continuing to innovate. They kind of have the same mindset as J&D does in moving forward. And they've done some things that are TPI area and inlet, kind of just the masterful piece of engineering, just to be able to increase that airspeed coming out, get a further throw than 10 feet. We can throw that air 30 feet into the house. Well, we've got a lot more stratification of that air then. That air is warmer. We're talking about cold weather ventilation. That's kind of a key. And then that throws like that on minimum ventilation, maybe we don't need that stir fan right away on that second set of nests. Maybe we can move it in a little bit. Just gives us more opportunities. We've kind of gone that way. We're going to stick on making the best fans we can make with the best efficiencies and the highest outputs and the least amount of maintenance. We focus on that, partner with people who are doing the best on a singular thing, then we can provide kind of that ventilation package.
Yeah, you've been around the block when it comes to these projects, and usually when you and I get together, we're able to kind of talk through some of the industry challenges. If you can talk directly to a farmer and what's the value of ventilation and why it's so important, this is your opportunity, because the listener group may not be from necessarily farming, but they're all over the industry and can look and see what ventilation is. So do me a favor, explain the value of good ventilation in a house and some of the aspects that we may not know about.
Well, first and foremost, it's animal well-being, right? It is providing an environment where those animals can thrive. They need all the things that we as human needs, they need. They need to be cooled down. They need to be warmed up. We all do better when the air is a little drier, a little less humid. If we got too much humid, we all get a little hot. If it's 85 degrees outside and the humidity is 90%, guess what? It's going to feel like it's 110. Just all of those things. But when we talk to people, and I can bring up just a simple little deal that we worked on here a couple months ago with a beef cattle farmer, right? And he's got this small building that he drops calves in, and once that's kind of kept a little warm, but then once they're out of there a day or two, and then they move on out into maybe a 3-sided shed or even just a windbreak, because once that calf is up and going, it can handle some of that weather. Well, he decided he wasn't going to go with our design. He just wanted something to destratify some air. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Got the call back. I guess I was at IPPE, and he says, this doesn't work. I said, what do you want to do? You want to do the design that we did where we were pulling air in and we were forcing the destratification with this destratification fan, and then we were exhausting air and getting a 15-minute air exchange rate because we got to get that moisture down. Basically, he's bringing in calves and it's cold and wet in there and he can't get calves dry. He's getting, lung issues, pneumonias and things like this popping up real quick. And he's like, I got to change my way. So I think just providing an environment for your animals to thrive, whatever species they are, that's kind of that's the key. That's the key. If you're going to go cheap on ventilation, I say good luck.
I've been in buildings with high ammonia levels that are just absolutely,
Yes.
there's a reason for that. You talked about turnover, air turnover. I mean, all of those animals are breathing. They're breathing in oxygen, letting out CO2. That air's got to turn over. If it's not, it gets stale.
If it's a broiler, that broiler's putting out BTUs like crazy. If it's a dairy cow, I mean, you just think BTUs coming off of that cow that's eating that much forage, and she basically has this huge fermentation vat that's putting off heat. But we got to displace that somewhere. We've got to make these buildings work right. A little pullet's a whole lot different than a turkey. A turkey's different than a pig. As you move through this, what their temperature regulation is different in all species. But I think when you get right down to it, it is about providing that nice dry environment, prevents disease, prevents animals from crowding, right? So if we create a hot spot inside of the center of a barn and whatever animal it is wants to get away from there, they're getting away from there, but then they're crowding and they're creating more heat. And I mean, you need a place where everybody wants to lay out, and it's like the beach, everybody wants to lay out, get a little sun, it just make it a nice, beautiful environment. When we take disease out of this program and everything's healthy and the nutrition's right, we're going to create products, right, at a really high rate. Every employee that's working with their boots in the barn every day, they want that. They want their life easy. They don't want to be treating animals. They don't want to be sorting off stuff. They don't want to be pulling deads. They don't want any of that. If they can walk through a barn and go, everything looks good, and walk out, that's the easiest part of their day.
Well, and it's easier for them too, in just their environment. I mean, if it's a healthy environment for the birds, it's going to be healthy for the staff. And a day where staffing's tough, that's their work environment. My office is at 70 degrees all day long. They should be able to have 70 degree all day long as well, even when it's 100 degrees outside. And it's possible with ventilation.
It is possible. And that's the beauty of it. It's just J&D, I talked about a little bit about, can we take maintenance away, right? That they don't have to check this stuff. And I think that's the goal. I don't think we're there yet 100%, but that's the goal. Any issues that we've had, we work to make them to get to that goal. I mean, that's the whole point of it. We get to that goal that we put. I think when I started the first case, I said, so what are you selling me? I said, I hope to sell you some fans, and I hope that you don't talk to me again until you need to buy some more for a new project, right? I mean, that's kind of the goal. Same with you. We can set up a control system for somebody and it just works and it does what it's supposed to do. And you call me for some minor tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it's just you rock and roll. I mean, that's always the goal.
That is Prism's goal, by the way, is to make your stuff sing and not have to have people call you at all, and to make sure that it's 70 degrees based on the animal movement and everything else that works together. And it amazes me as these buildings continue to evolve and new designs come out and different environments, different locations, whether it's the dry deserts of Arizona versus the humid Midwest or even humider Southeast. It's crazy because there's different things that have to happen. Now, I'm going to change subjects here, and I'm going to have you talk direct to that farmer who's getting ready to build his building. What would you say to him or her?
In today's world, first off, what are we growing here? What are we putting in that building? I mean, that's where it starts. And then, what his vision for it is too, a little bit. I know we worked on some projects together where the vision was brought to us, right? It's my job to execute that vision. Well, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes there's a guy who comes, I'm putting in a pullet house and I'm going to tunnel ventilate it. Okay, what are your thoughts here? I can put together the numbers for you. I can do this. And one of the biggest things that I try to do when we can is to not only show them how maybe the calculations work together to make this right, we can also work with our engineers and go into SolidWorks and we can create a flow simulation so they can see what this building is going to look like. One of the really hard things to do in a flow simulation is mild cold weather ventilation through a cage type house. It's very, very difficult because you've got so much going on. So we kind of trust that cold weather math, and then we work towards that warm weather, say at a pullet house. What drives the agriculture industry is what does the consumer want too. So we're putting yourself into a position where you can meet a niche sometimes, where the cage free thing is big, right? I mean, it just It is, and it's driven by the consumer. How can we put yourself in a position where that barn can be cage free? And then hey, guess what? Those don't have any value to us. Now we can put 15-20% more birds in this house and make it into a standard deal too. I think there's a lot of that stuff that's got to be taken into consideration. One of the things that's been pretty big right now, obviously every poultry farmer and dairy farmer now deals with high path avian influenza. We've got some customers that are talking about filtering barns, doing positive pressure filter. Sometimes those are remodels. That creates huge challenges because you got to be completely sealed up, So this isn't just we're going to put some fans in the wall and slap some filters in there and it's going to make a difference. No, we have to make sure that this is really, really, really done right so that we control every bit of air that goes into and out of that building. The other thing that we kind of drive is fan efficiencies. As we talk about this, I ask the question a lot of times, especially in a bigger project, what are you paying for your electricity? Is it 4.5 cents or is it 15.5 cents? Where do you live is going to drive what type of fan you might buy. Just because of capital cost of a high efficiency fan or an ECM or electronically commutated fan, which basically is taking your power from AC, converting it to DC power, and then we can control how many RPMs that fan runs. And the slower the RPMs, the higher CFM per watt becomes, depending on the size of the facility. I mean, I've got a farmer in the Southwest that running his fans the way he does, he figures he saves himself $20,000 a month. How is that not a return, And when we did the math on it, he bought 45 more fans than he needed, but he says they paid for themselves in 6 months. And I think that's some of the value when we look at things is how can we make your barn more efficient? Talked about things being rated to power wash or dry wash. How easy is it to access what you need? We talked about that light trap combination system is kind of being something that's fairly innovative. It's built to be able to just open doors like on a closet instead of taking out stuff and setting it over here. It's all hinged up and then you lock it up. Trying to make things user friendly and make things work together. And I think that's a product that came from working with an industry partner who wanted to solve a problem. Those are things that I really like doing. I like finding that. But when you talk about that farmer, it's really about getting them to see and understand how air flows. I think that's the biggest piece and it's the hardest thing to kind of see. It's easy to see once you've got it done and you put some smoke behind it. Oh, yeah, we can see how the air flows. We've talked a little bit in the past about tunnel ventilating a pullet house or a layer house that has cages in it. You see a lot of times where they look at what is the size of that inlet door or how many birds are in there, and they do it off CFM per bird. And you really have to look at what you're putting in for fans is basically the dimensions of your walkways in between the cages, because that's where the air is going to flow. Everything else is a brick. And it doesn't really flow through the cages. It doesn't flow the way maybe we think it should. Water and air are the same. They find the path of least resistance and they take it. And we see that a lot. Dairy barns too, where by the time you get into them, the air is up above them and it's not having any value to cooling your livestock. So it's really about just understanding and being able to see how air does move and flow.
One thing that might come off a little controversial, and my thought is challenging old time farming a little bit. Even if you think you know exactly what is the right thing to do, it's okay to challenge what you know by getting other people's opinions and poking holes in it. One of the common projects we worked on, the veterinarian that was in charge of it basically said, here's my concept, guys, tear it apart. And he didn't stop. I mean, he continually evolved that concept and continually to made modifications because it realized that with cage free, it's a different process. There's different challenges. The height of the room brings in its own challenges. You think, oh my gosh, this house over here has an additional 3 feet. That should be perfect. No, the air went there and it wasn't circulating the rest of the barn. And you're like, yep. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, no, it does. You just said it. Path of least resistance. I mean, how have you recently challenged somebody that thought they knew exactly what they were doing and you were able to go in and basically change their mind?
I guess recently was kind of bidding some new layers, sat down and they had told me, bring me the Cadillac, make this barn a Cadillac, right? And after we were sitting down for a while, I said, I'm sitting here talking to you guys and talking to you about this stuff, and you look confused. And the man in charge says, we've been sitting here doing this forever, tunnel ventilating these barns down here in the Southeast. And you just told us we've been doing it wrong. And he said, you're the first person that I've ever listened to that made sense. And it was on that thought process of where is your pinch point for air? So basically they've been overworking fans. They said that their maintenance on their old belt drive stuff was just insane, like 3 times a year changing stuff out. I said, that makes sense. Basically have an understanding of where your pinch point is. That's the most amount of air that you can pull through. Whatever cubic feet you got, square footage you have in that opening, that is the maximum amount of CFM you can put on that wall, exhausting it out. And once they kind of understood that, they're like, okay, let's rock and roll. I can tell you what, taking you over to something a little bit different, a dairy calf barn ventilation. Everybody kind of has a concern about keeping calves warm. So they do some positive pressure stuff with tubes, and they do work well, and they kind of move stuff throughout the house, but you're not getting much cooling out of that. Again, it's the same thing where we looked at that project and said, break this apart. I had somebody on the end of it come to me and say, how do I do this? And we went and broke it down, and we ended up tunnel ventilating dairy calves. And I got up there and I met with this gal who's running this farm, and there's like 30 of these little barns there, and they're like 26 feet wide and 162 feet long. I'm like, how is this going? She goes, well, this is the first barn. This is the first group that we put in here, and we're getting ready to move them out today. And she says, I haven't treated a calf yet. I said, how's that compared to what you used to do? She goes, we used to treat calves every day. They allowed me to work with them to challenge how they've done things. And when we got done and put it together, they're like, yes, let's roll. The way we went and success. The person running it isn't going to be mad because they're okay with not treating. Now they get to really do a good job of their care and daily tasks. So, and then they, again, went with high efficiency, low maintenance motors. They don't have to worry about any maintenance and messing around with things. So there's always a way to challenge the old school way. I remember talk about that project that we worked on. I remember going to another farm where we worked on expanding that facility too. And I remember the veterinarian being in the barn with, one of the workers and telling him kind of what was going to happen. And he says, you're going to hate it, right? You're not going to like this. It's going to be harder than what you're doing now. And I think in talking with people now, as opposed to 3 years ago, now that they've kind of figured it out, it's not that hard. Once you kind of say, hey, we can do this, and everybody buys in and says, let's rock and roll, I think they figure it out. It's not that hard. I think Iowa State University swine people talk about ventilation as their unpaid employee. And I think that's a real important way to kind of feel that out. I mean, I like that term. It's my unpaid employee. It can make me money if I take care of it and utilize it properly.
Well, it's interesting because one of the challenges that we found is the designers aren't the ones in the barn sometimes. How they translate that information and that learning down to their farm staff to operate it in the way that it was designed. Because if you take some of the best chicken houses and you don't operate them as designed, or you decide to maybe not seal them up as well, and now the air is uncontrollable in those spaces, they can be a nightmare.
You're so right. And it doesn't matter what species of animal it is. If it's designed right, making sure it gets trained, not only just trained on how to set it up and run it and those kind of things, but training on how to, troubleshoot it and make sure that the things are the way they're supposed to be. Okay, let's just set this thing up and let's measure our airspeed, coming out of an inlet. Let's measure our airspeed as we kind of exit the barn. We can do some things a whole lot easier without animals in there just to make sure that they're working right. You talk about commissioning a brand new barn. I've always encouraged people to let's think about kind of recommissioning it in a simpler way in between our groups, just to make sure it's still doing what it's supposed to do. And maybe, maybe an actuator didn't slip a little bit and those inlets are open a half an inch more than they're supposed to be, or whatever that situation is, and we can reset it and get it right. Yeah, it's always about execution on the farm. Sometimes there's employees that they have the right mindset to them. You can say, okay, on this farm, you're our ventilation guy, to make sure that these things get kind of recommissioned and that they make sure that everything's acting the way it's supposed to and performing the way it's supposed to. Or if we see birds in a house that all want to congregate to one spot, there's a reason for that. Let's figure it out and let's fix it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunities as we talk about minimum ventilation and we talk about heat. With the new designs in cage free, as these birds want to get comfortable, heat's important.
Okay.
When you incentivize a staff member maybe to say, hey, you need to keep your heat bill down, then there's this balance of, do I do the right thing and put heat in the barn? Heat's important. Outside heat, dry heat.
Dry heat is important. And it's very important to make sure that you get it in, you get it stratified, you get it mixed. You see this in the swine industry too, where propane's expensive. I mean, and we all get it. Propane is expensive. So we need to make sure that our minimum ventilation is dialed in as best as you can get it dialed in for that winter, but you're still pulling in air that's today in Iowa that's 15 degrees, right? So how do you get that air tempered as quickly as you can before it kind of lands on your flock, right? So we talk about speed of that air coming in through that inlet. Can we get it to throw 20, 30 feet? If it's throwing in there, it's mixing with that air, that it's tempering that air. And now we've got a nice warm environment. We talk about circulation fans. Circulation fans are the greatest thing we've got in terms of wintertime. We can't have a heater every 10 feet, right? We've got 4 or 5 heaters inside of this huge 70 by 500 foot room. That's enough BTUs to warm this barn up in relation to those birds. But how do we move that heat around so that heat is in every corner of the building where those birds are utilizing that space, eliminating cold spots and hot spots, both the same. Most of the time when people try to eliminate or reduce the amount of heat without dialing in their ventilation, you're probably going to cause health issues, just because it's the easiest thing to do. We're going to back the fans off. Well, now we've slowed the airspeed through there. So the birds closest to the intake wall are probably a little cold. And now the birds on the other side are kind of wet and warm. And yeah, they're not very happy either. It is about air exchange rate and making sure that you're exchanging that air in that room 4 times an hour. Now, things are a little bit different when we start talking about pullets and things like that, where you've got a very small bird in a very big space. Finding your ways to manipulate your way through that, through some purging of air and things like that. We're going to pull a lot for a short period of time and allow that stuff to kind of temper in there a little bit better. So there's a lot of ways to do it. Burning propane creates some really good growing livestock if we do it in the right and efficient fashion.
So what's the future of ventilation look like?
Future of ventilation, I truly believe, is being able to dial in and know exactly what your output of that fan is. Coming from the swine industry, minimum ventilation was about a pit fan, right? So you're pulling air in through the attic, you're tempering it through a ceiling inlet and drawing it down across the pigs and out the side. They're going to run that fan by changing the amount of electricity that's going to it, right? The voltage going to it to slow that fan down. Well, even in the fans that we have like that, nobody's got a test to tell you how many CFM it's doing. And most people just assume that it's a linear thing. So if it's 2,000 CFM at 50%, it's doing 1,000. No, it's probably doing about 600. And so I think that's a big piece, is just being able to dial everything in that way. I also think that this filter thing, especially on the pullet houses, might have a pretty big future. But again, it comes down to how everything is executed. The challenge is, when we talk about preventing disease, airborne disease, we still have to rely on all of our other biosecurity practices to make sure that we don't carry those diseases in with us. Whether it's keeping out other birds, it's our biosecurity systems and changing clothes, shower in, shower out, all the products that we bring into these buildings, making sure that those are decontaminated. Because basically we're talking about diseases. If they're airborne, it means that they're everywhere, right? So we can seal this barn up and do it right, and I think that has some value. But again, we have to have everything else in place too. I think positive pressure things, as we look at poultry, I think can have some value. It's not used very commonly, and it does have its challenges. But I think the beauty of it, as we talked earlier about these birds over here, they're crowding together for a reason or whatever, that we have kind of these hot spots and cold spots in a barn. And if we do that positive pressure correctly, I talk about it like blowing up a balloon with a small hole in it, right? So we can kind of keep that balloon full. And what that means is we're filling up the balloon. The building, the airspace is the balloon. If we fill that up, we know that the air is hitting every corner of that building. So the air should be similar in terms of its quality, speed, everything throughout that facility. It'd be a challenge. I'd love to take on that challenge. I'd love to have one of these guys come and say, Eric, let's work on a positive pressure barn. Doesn't have to be filtered or anything like that. Just a positive pressure barn. I would be all in on it.
I imagine you would.
I just think I talked to some very large swine integrators that build some buildings that have some ventilation problems. I've been in them and, talked about them and things like that. And I talked to them at the Iowa pork deal again. I said, finisher, whatever they were, 249 and 251 and whatever these finishers were. I said, I'd love to do this with you. Just let me know. Just let me know. Because I think we can make, I think we can make those pigs grow exponentially faster than they are in certain parts of those buildings because they create dead spots.
Well, what's unique about you, Eric, is you've got experience from across different species. And I think sometimes, we think specialists in this industry, the ones that are only doing eggs or only doing poultry. I mean, that's their specialty. And what's nice is your experience from around the industry. It's all about animal health. It's all about the different species, because I think the lessons you're learning in swine and turkey and all these are really paying off as wins in the egg industry as well.
Yeah, and I think that's just an important piece of what J&D is. It was founded as a dairy-centric deal, and it's still probably 50% of our business. But I'm going to tell you that this poultry and layer side of it, if it hasn't taken it over, it's getting pretty close. Our name is getting out there, is bringing some value to the industry. We like the fact that we're building these things and constructing them. When Don decided to spend $2.5 million to put in an AMCA-approved test chamber so that every fan that we sell, we know exactly how it's going to perform. And then I go out to the field and I'm like, it's performing a little too well. We got to dial this back, And those are the things that I really like, and being able to have those capabilities right inside the door, right? President's office, she walks 30 steps and she can walk into that test chamber and talk to those guys and see how things are going. And it's really exciting to be a part of something that is trying to push the envelope, trying to find the new things. I worked with somebody in my past who said, there's one trend that never changes in terms of going up. We talk about trends, whether it's stock market trends or we talk about CME trends, things like that. One trend doesn't change, and that the human population continues to grow. And agriculture's job is to grow with it in the most efficient way, be able to provide them nutrition, not just food. We need nutrition. So we need eggs and poultry and milk and dairy and beef, and we need it all. How does J&D find a role in making producer X get X amount of eggs over his average in that building? Or this dairy farmer, the peak dairy production in terms of cows milking is January, February. We're sitting in it right now. How do we extend that milk production, that peak milk production out into August or September and not get those drops in June? How can we extend that production out, help them become more efficient? In the poultry industry, there's a lot of people who want to be on the smaller side of things. How can we make them better at what they do and create more product and more profitability? And the same side, the integrator side, big facilities, 500,000 hens in a barn or 10, 12, 25,000 cows in a barn. How do we make it so that makes them more efficient and makes that environment that much better for them too? It's everybody. I've had people that take care of little goats and they have 400, dairy goats on feed, and okay, let's go. We've created ventilation systems around the facilities they've had, and taking, some aspects of poultry, some aspects of swine, some aspects of dairy, to bring all this stuff together, and you can create a system for something that you've never created before. It's kind of fun.
Well, Eric, I really do appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners?
Always be looking and challenging yourselves in everything that you do. I think that's what you do at Prism, trying to find innovative ways to provide solutions. Sometimes in my office or in your office, if you don't know a problem, you can't come up with a solution. So I always feel free to reach out to help find solutions to whatever problems that you've got. And again, we're here to play our roles in providing nutrition to our world. Get right down to it. That's what we do. It's cool to watch and work with people who are innovative, working with you guys and, some of your, let's say, smoke detection things. I just think that's awesome. I've taken it to a couple of big dairy farmers and said, hey, what do you think? And they're like, I don't know about that right now. But they're thinking about it. We can put this in a lot of different places and make it work. Working with TPI and how they're innovative in their things. We started working with another company just on some lighting stuff, and how do we change lighting and how we do things in the dairy instead of just a straight LED light. Can we do things different? Because we see what we're doing in the poultry industry, in the layer industry, and how we use lighting to create the optimal condition for those birds to lay the most eggs. How can we do that in the dairy industry for those cows to produce more milk? I always try to be innovative. I was asked in a stay interview the other day of our core values, which one do I align with? And innovation is a number one. One of the things that I bring up, and I think it was like your first podcast, maybe your second one. It was right after IPPE last year, and you mentioned that you'd like to see more of the people that work in the barns every day getting an opportunity to go to those shows again. And I've noticed that across the board with the swine and the dairy too, that it's not necessarily the people that are in the barn every day that go to those. And I think having those people, maintenance people, production people, be able to walk through those shows and visit with people and see what's out there and maybe learn something or bring things to us as vendors. I think that's an ideal thing that probably maybe needs to come back to us a little bit. It's always nice to talk to somebody who's in the barn every day and get their views and what they see.
Well, I could say I couldn't say it better, Eric, but you did a good job of quoting that from last year. And I'll reiterate that as we go into show season, is probably some of the best innovation comes from the guys that are in the barns doing the job. And as the decision makers get further and further away from the barn, it's hard. The good input comes from the guys doing it every day, from the guys putting in the work in today's world. I mean, some of the best people in this industry are the maintenance guys that are solving problems, and they can tell you what's wrong with your equipment.
Yep, they do. They do. I mean, it's great. I like it. There's certain ones out there that are great about it. Hey, we've got this problem and it's reoccurring. All right, I'm going to look into it. Yep, that is a problem. We're going to get you fixed, right? If it's not a simple fix, it's redesign, right? And we've redesigned things several times to make sure that they do hold up. Because that's a tough thing about being innovative. So you can work on something, you get it put together, it tests great in a chamber and all of that. On the farm is a different story. And a fan that's 60 foot off the ground is a different story than one that's 10 foot off the ground or 3 foot off the ground. So we have to learn those things and bring them back and make them better. But that's what we want, is we want those guys that are out there, whether it's the install crew or whether it's the people that are running the barn and taking care of the birds. We learn, we make it better, and we move forward. And again, staying innovative.
Well, Eric, with that, I'm going to pull us into a close here because I think you and I could talk forever. We usually do. We usually do. And so thank you, J&D Fans, for providing Eric to the industry and giving him an opportunity to solve problems across species. And like I said, it's been my pleasure working with you on different projects. And I know you truly are making a difference in this industry. So thank you for that. Listeners, I can only challenge you. This is going to be coming out before peak. Please Visit us at Peak. I know J&D is going to be at Peak. Prism Controls is going to be at Peak. Please stop and visit. Ask your questions. Send more people. If you want to do something about your career, don't wait for your boss to send you to the Peak. And what I mean by Peak is Minneapolis. It used to be called the Midwest Show. Don't wait for your boss. If you want to do something right for your own career, go and learn. It's a great place to learn. And I'm sure that you're going to bring more innovation, more ideas back to the farm. And in the future, your leaders are going to be more than willing to send you, because there's lots of conferences, there's lots of tech talks, there's lots of vendors. Those are the places where everybody kind of lets their guard down and you get to see a lot of things. So with Peak coming up here in a few weeks when this thing airs, please attend the show, stop by, see Eric, stop by the folks at Prism Controls, visit with them. I'm not going to be there this year. I'm going to be at a different show. Definitely stop by and say hi. So with that, I'm going to consider that my plug for Prism Controls like I do. Listeners, share this with other folks. Share this with your maintenance person. Share this with your boss. I don't care, because this is the kind of information that's going to continue to change the industry. When we work together as vendors and continue to work as an industry, we're going to continue to grow and we're going to continue to feed the world. So thank you, listeners. Really appreciate you. Have a great day.